All right, good evening and still good morning in the United States. Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Colin Wellenkamp. I'm the Executive Director of the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative. We are an association of 102 United States mayors along the entire 10-state length of the Mississippi River. I'm joined by our leadership, member of our leadership, Mayor Eric Simmons of Greenville, Mississippi. He is our co-chair. His co-chair is the mayor of Memphis, Tennessee. That is Jim Strickland, who is a little adverse to traveling halfway around the planet, but is supporting you 100% nonetheless. And on the other side is Dr. Karen Waldrop. She's Global Conservation Director for Ducks Unlimited, which is a global conservation authority headquartered in Memphis, along the Mississippi River. And what we're going to be talking about today is a new announcement on innovative new natural infrastructure projects to meet the climate challenge at watershed scale. This is not happening much anywhere on Earth, and this is not happening anywhere else in the United States at this scale yet. We hope to have other major basins joining us. And I do want to emphasize that's river basins. The Great Lakes in the United States have been doing this for quite some time. They have a 10-year start on us, but we were the first to bring it to a river corridor, which is actually, it's a larger corridor and a larger basin than the Great Lakes, but we've been looking at a lot of their work, and they've been a source of inspiration for us. And another source of inspiration for us is America's All In. They've actually made it possible for us to be here tonight, and they have made it possible for us to engage at the international level within the COP all the way back to 2015. So they've been a great partner. You're also going to hear about another partner, and that is CDP. CDP Investments and Climate Disclosure has made it possible for us to make this work happen and onboard the partnerships that we're going to lead to future funding that'll keep this work going. So special thanks to CDP for being a sustained partner and making the introductions and the partnerships at the international capital level to forward this work. So I'm going to turn to you first, Mayor Simmons, to sort of frame the problem for us and kind of tell us what cities along the Mississippi River, using your city as an example, have been going through that really created the motivation and the impetus for this work to come to the fray.
So on a micro level, before we get to a macro level, just on the river, we have experienced all kind of disasters. In Greenville, Mississippi, I was a councilman in 2011, and we had a flood to occur. And we began to assess the type of municipal damages, agricultural damages, commercial business damages to individuals. And of course, you know, in the federal level, you got to meet a threshold. You got to meet a state threshold. You got to meet a federal threshold before you can declare, you know, those state of emergencies to receive the necessary funding to get your community the scintilla of money you really get at a small level just to bounce back. In 2011, we experienced $500,000 in municipal damages. To show you how climate change is accelerating and these climate impacts and risks are accelerating, in 2016, we had a flood. I had become a mayor on January 2nd on my mother's birthday, 2016. And 2 months in, I had to do a local emergency because we had the flood of 2016. And we began to assess the municipal damages. So from 2011, 500,000, 2016, over 700,000 in municipal damages, not including agriculture, not including business or individual, just from a municipal level. In 2019, the historic flood of 2019, that was historic in scope, of course, but also in how long we were above flood stage. Greenville, Mississippi was above flood stage for over 170 days. And so in 2019, from 2011, 500,000, 2016, 600,000, and 2019, we were over $4 million in municipal damages. We had over 37 sewer failures and 30 street failures, all because of the flood of 2019. And then COVID hit. That framework shows how critically important an organization like Mississippi River Cities and Towns is, because Greenville alone could not really solve that problem. All right? Our budget on an annual basis is anywhere between 80 million and 110 million. It's small compared to Memphis, very small compared to St. Louis, but a budget indeed. But the only way we really can bounce back and bounce back quick is if we look at our budget and we begin to increase sewer rates and water rates on our folks. With a 38.6% poverty rate, it's really difficult to do that because we have folks with fixed incomes, we have single mothers, and folks who really just can't do it. Working with MRCTI up and down the river on corridor scale, working with global partners like Americans All In, Ducks Unlimited, and Karen will talk about that. We did the largest national nature-based disaster study in the country by looking to see how we can deploy nature-based assets on the Mississippi River at corridor scale with these 102 mayors up and down the river. And so in that, we're looking at 66,000 acres of nature-based assets. That's wetlands, reconnected floodplains, that's reconnected backwater reaches, and what it could do in those high water areas where we're having floods is kind of hold the water, to kind of protect the cities. But in those situations where now we're experiencing a 30-year drought, it could absorb some of the water and slowly release the water that is needed so that grain and the wheat and the U.S. exported grain can get to market quicker. That can help. And so tonight, we're very pleased to be innovative from a bottom-up action where climate action, I really feel, is taking place with our cities and then our regions, and from our regions, how we move up, to announce 5 areas where we are deploying these nature-based resources. And so not only is it ecologically good and safe and sound, but it also creates those economic development projects on these areas, in these 5 areas, whether it's from Memphis to Greenville to St. Louis. And these cities can be more resilient, we can be more efficient, but also we also can help with the food security and water quality and security that impacts the world. So thank you so much, Colin.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to put a couple of fine points on how that process came together a little bit, because I think it's an intriguing story for our audience because everyone we talk to seems to always look up and go, wow, this is a partnership that's not necessarily conventional or intuitive, that the way it came together. So you're absolutely right. Your city, all the cities on the Mississippi, from the headwaters to the Gulf, are experiencing all of these disasters from 2005 forward, and we were ticking up $1 billion after $1 billion disaster.
$230 billion in disaster losses since 2005.
Right, to today, and not including the drought that we're in right now. So in 2019, a conversation began to come together, actually after 2016, so 2018, a conversation started to come together between some of our mayors and some work that they were noticing happening on the ground around their cities. And one of them happened to be, in particular, Grafton, Illinois. If anybody's familiar with Grafton, Illinois is a little town of 680 people just north of St. Louis on the Illinois side of the Mississippi. And they got the heck kicked out of them. They were sustaining an 80% loss to their economy due to climate disasters. The mayor at the time noticed a project right across from him in Missouri that folks were clearing land and making a depression, and he wondered what was that? And it was a Ducks Unlimited project to make a wetland. And he called me about it, and he said, can you find out more about this project? Because I'm wondering if that wetland could take on some of the water that I'm taking on right now. Because the flood of 2019 was coming. It started raining in 2018, and it didn't stop for another 9 months. Longest flood in history. Longest and largest. And so we did. We had a conversation, and I got introduced to a guy named Mike Sertle, who was moving dirt out there. And we asked, Mike, you guys are making this for ducks, right? He said, yep, that's what we do here at Ducks Unlimited. And I said, do you think you could make it for us too? And he said, what do you mean? Well, if you're going to flood this land, how much water are you going to take? Well, about 2,000 acres or 2,000 lateral acres of floodwater, and so that's acres piled on top of acres for each inch of water, right? And I said, okay. I told the mayor was very excited about this. When can this project be ready? When can it take on water? And can it help my city? And that's where it started. Then it really took off. Ducks Unlimited started talking to us about other projects in other parts of the river. Well, if you're interested in Grafton, you might be interested in Memphis, might be interested in New Orleans. Oh, we're also doing work in St. Paul. And one thing led to another, and we signed an agreement in 2018, and then we started putting our projects together in 2019 and through COVID, and now we are ready to unveil 66,000 acres worth of projects and where they will be. We have a slide to show everybody where that's gonna occur. So these are our 5 project areas that are going to be deployed over the next couple of years. Some of these projects are already well underway. One is near completion near the St. Louis area. Others are in various forms of development. But we are very excited, as the mayor said, to announce 66,000 new acres of permanent conservation land of wetlands, marshes, forests, and reconnected backwater and floodplain, 8 states, 30 cities, that is going to take off 8 hours of peak flood time for our cities in these areas using the 2019 flood as the baseline. So the comprehensive vulnerability assessment that the mayor talked about that we did, which was the largest of its kind in the United States when we did it with 2 degrees adapt, it determined for us the most vulnerable areas of the Mississippi River. These are the areas that are most subject to repetitive loss and are in the most degree of harm's way and ongoing risk going forward. So what we're able to do is, with these nature-based solutions, with this natural infrastructure, not only are we going to sequester carbon, improve water quality, limit several million pounds of nutrient load, keep that from going into the river, but we're also going to take 8 hours of peak flood time of the worst 8 hours in 2019 flood. And that's when the most property was destroyed, that's when the most infrastructure was implicated, and that's when we lost the most lives. How is this going to happen? What are these projects about? How do these work? That's where I'm going to turn to you for, Karen, right now, who is an expert in all things nature-based solution.
I wouldn't say that, but I'm who you've got. So just to back up a little bit and talk about Ducks Unlimited, and we do this throughout the country. We work with partners. We're a conservation organization. We focus on wetlands and grasslands, and we talk about the benefits for waterfowl and wildlife, but it also, the work that we do in restoring and enhancing wetlands and grasslands also help people in many ways that oftentimes they don't realize, right? From flood attenuation, coastal resiliency, carbon sequestration, all of these, clean water, all these things that the mayor was just talking about is really what we focus on and the benefits. Now, we talked about what this is going to do on the Mississippi River, and you might ask, well, if wetlands are so good at flood attenuation and stopping flooding, then what's going on? Why do we have all this flooding on the Mississippi? Well, it's because we have lost 80% of the wetlands along the Mississippi River, and people don't realize when that happens, that the great toll that it takes on the ability for the river to augment the river flow and to sequester carbon or to help with flood attenuation. that is what we have changed on the landscape. And so at Ducks Unlimited, we work with partners. We work with state, federal, local partners like MRCTI and private landowners, and we work with them to identify what the projects are that they are wanting and what the goals are. And we know that the goals of MRCTI have a lot to do with flooding, reducing flooding, the impacts of flooding. Also, they're interested in carbon sequestration. Recreation is another goal. Habitat, wildlife habitat is important to the mayors as well, because it's important to the people in their cities and towns. So we work on that, and then we develop these projects that they were just talking about, and we're pretty excited about those. And all of these projects will have different components of that in there. For example, we start all the way up north, well, not all the way up north. Well, we will be working actually up in the headwaters. The mayor mentioned that floods also during drought can slowly, because they hold water, they can recharge aquifers, and then they can slowly release that into the river system. So we're actually working in the headwaters to do those types of things, putting in those wetlands that will be able to provide that ability to then, in periods of drought, release water to then help with the impacts of drought. But talking about northern Illinois, one of the projects that we're working on, everything we do, we can work everything from land acquisition and easements, protecting some of this property to keep it from becoming converted to something else and losing more wetlands. And that's one of the projects that we're looking at in northern Illinois. In that area, we're taking flood-prone ag land, and we are purchasing it. This is land that's been in USDA, NRCS programs, and we're taking that and we're converting it back into natural floodplains. And then we're going to be giving it to a nearby wildlife management area in northern Illinois, so it'll be there for public recreation as well. And so we're changing that, taking that out of agriculture that really wasn't very good ag land because it floods every several years. And so we're turning that into a benefit with restoring that floodplain. Another example we were talking about in Illinois, Horseshoe Bend, which is one that's partway completed. We've actually got a couple of projects there. The Horseshoe Bend one is really interesting because we increased the surface area by about 60 acres. So what that does, it doesn't sound like a lot, but what's happening is there's 17,000 acres during a heavy flood event, 17,000 acres of 17,000 gallons of water is coming into that area. And I'm getting my numbers a little off here. I can't remember if it's what the numbers are, but regardless, what we're able to do is with increasing that surface area of all the wetlands, we're able to hold another 250,000 gallons of water that comes in from all of those surrounding acres of runoff during a heavy flood event. Not only that, we're restoring and fixing some pumps that have just degraded over time, and by doing that and increasing that capacity, we're able to pull off the water. What used to take 25 days to pull off water from a heavy flood event, we're able to do in 5 days. So that takes a lot of pressure off of the city and off of the people that flood's impacting. So that one has a double impact right there. But also in that area, we're working on another project where we're also doing reforestation, along with, repairing some degraded wetlands. We're also enhancing those and some infrastructure. And then at the same time, we're planting trees, so it's providing that carbon sequestration benefits as well. You can take these projects all the way down to the coast, where we're working in Louisiana at the mouth of the Mississippi, where we're building earthen terraces. And these are linear terraces that we actually take dredge material out of the water, and we build these linear terraces, and then they have with this earthen material, and then we get vegetation growing on them. And what this does is you provide benefits of taking out that salinity. So what's happening down there is you're getting the influx of salinity into the fresh water, and you're destroying the marshes are being destroyed. So what we're able to do with these terraces, it helps with that, but it also helps with when a storm comes in. You can imagine the storm surge. Well, these linear marshes, if you can imagine them, they can actually slow that surge, the wave action coming in and flooding the towns. So it decreases that. It also helps help with the impacts of sea level rise. So these are benefits that, again, that we're working on in these areas, and we're developing several of them. We have already developed, but we're also in the process of identifying, and we're using some information with 2 Degrees Adapt, which is another partner of ours. I'm not sure if we mentioned them or not before. And then we're able to identify these projects. And we're a turnkey organization, so we have biologists that help go out and work with these partners, but we also have engineers on staff that identify and design these projects, and then also construction managers that help to implement these projects on the ground. So we take projects all the way from a concept and working with the partners and finding out what they want, all the way to completion. And we also help with writing federal and state grants to help pay for these projects as well, as some of the philanthropy work that we do as well through our organization. So we are extremely excited to be part of this. Very grateful to the partnership of all the mayors and of Colin and Brant as well. And it's an incredible story and really something that should be celebrated throughout the country and throughout the world.
Well, thank you, Doctor. And one thing I want to go back what you said really quick is all the assets you talked about and the techniques that you're deploying. I want to put a fine point on it that we know these assets work, right? We've seen them in action.
Yes.
We've already started to see a return on this investment. In Hurricane Ida last August of 2021, we saw the terraces start to function and work and slow down water into these communities, also limit saltwater intrusion. And then just this past July, in July 26th, we got a 1,000-year rain event in the St. Louis region. From St. Charles County, Missouri to Madison County, Illinois, it was 8 hours of rain, but 11 inches of rain in 8 hours. Unprecedented amount of water. And the Horseshoe Lake project that you're talking about was able to onboard 750 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of water, just so you can visualize what this is in your mind, instead of using acres, that would have otherwise gone into homes, businesses, and destroyed a lot of infrastructure on its way to the river. Now, these natural assets can take a beating, and they do need repairs after these monumental, unprecedented events. And if it rains enough, everybody's going to get wet, right? But we know it worked. We know it helped. We know it took the edge off. We know it saved millions of dollars in damage, saved lives already, and that's a project that's not even completed yet.
That's right.
We're going to add a few hundred more Olympic-sized swimming pools to the capacity of that asset, right?
Yes, and the speed of being able to remove that water off of the landscape and being able to pull it in and holding it and then slowly releasing it back into the river. So, which is another wonderful thing to be able to do. And the great thing about it is what we're doing is wonderful for biodiversity. It's wonderful for waterfowl, for wildlife, and for people. And it's those types of projects that it's really everybody wins. And the service that it can provide, these services that these healthy ecosystems can provide to people is something that should not be overlooked by any means.
I want to latch on to that and kind of bring Mayor Simmons into the conversation just to catch that everybody winning, right? So a lot of the times the climate conversation in the United States can kind of get fixated on things like that are less tangible, like carbon sequestration, limiting warming by 1.5 degrees, things like that. That's hard for people. You can't really sell much in a city council meeting, right, or at a town hall in Greenville by just talking about that, right, Mayor? You have to have a lot of other benefits to make this work really sell at home.
Yes. So the folks in Greenville, Mississippi, they're not talking about climate change, but my farmers understand when their farm gets flooded and they can't grow their crop. They understand that. Or my businesses on the port understand if we have a high water event, which we have twice a year, and they can't produce, and they're sending folks home, and folks are losing their jobs or they're being laid off. They understand that. Folks in the poorest area in Greenville don't use the word climate change, but when the water is up and the seepage is coming underneath the levee, and they can't flush their toilet, they're calling an action line and saying, "Tell the mayor I can't flush. You need to send some public work crews out here." They understand that. And so you have to put it at a level where folks can understand, the world all can understand food. You know, right now we're sitting in here and everybody's thinking about eating. So we all can understand the joy of food. And so the Mississippi River Basin, like I said earlier, is responsible for 40% of the world's food. 92% of all of U.S. exported corn and exported feed grain comes from the Mississippi River Basin. And so people understand that. And so when you begin to think about food security, water quality, folks begin to understand how these impacts are impacting their lives. And so on the Mississippi River Basin, what we're trying to do is make sure we're solving not only what we're doing from city to the regional scale on the basin, but also how can we solve the world food problem as well. You know, I'm a firm believer that we have to begin to think more globally. No one continent can solve this problem. No one country can solve this problem. No one region or city. We have to collectively work together. We just had a meeting with the Prime Minister of Irrigation here in Egypt about the Nile and the saltwater intrusion that they're doing. They're liking what we're doing regarding nature-based infrastructures. We also like what they're doing regarding built-in infrastructure and what they're doing with linear solutions that they're doing. And so we've got to begin to talk among all of the river basins, the Amazon, the Nile, the Ganges, the Mississippi River, to see what best practices are working, but what failures are happening as well, so we don't duplicate that. That's how we become more efficient in the climate resilient work that we're doing, but also that's how we become more worldly if we can. It's about how we solve our world's problems. So I may live in Greenville, but if something happens on the Mississippi River Basin, it bothers the Frenchmen as well. And if something happened in the Nile or the Amazon, it affects us as well. So we're world citizens, and we need to begin to think about that as we talk about climate impact and risk, but also think about that as we think about world solutions about climate as well.
And I've heard the conceit or the rebuttal to that to MRCTI has been how can a mayor in Sartell, Minnesota, or Tiptonville, Tennessee, care about the global commodity supply chain and the environmental systems that support it when they got to keep lights on,
That's right.
when they got to fill potholes, when they got to make sure people go to work, and there's no boil orders? Why would they care about all that other stuff? And they care because it's their jobs.
It is.
It's their jobs, it's their industry, they're drinking the water, we're all drinking that water. And that's why they care.
That's that bottom-up action. You know, we see these folks at church, at Walmart, at Kroger, or even if you pumping some gas at your station. Somebody gonna say, Mayor, my kids and my wife don't like to go anywhere with me because a 20-minute trip to the local Walmart turns into a 3-hour trip. Because everybody is now talking about water in their basement, what's happening with their sewer system, what's happening on their street. When you think about potholes, it's at a very micro level. Folks don't understand, and I tell my folks, you know, you're talking about streets and infrastructure in Greenville, Mississippi. That's because we got sewer pipes that were built in 1896, and we just now started doing work in 2019. And then when the infrastructure law came in, now we're doing some repair work. But the big potholes in the streets in Greenville is because of the sanitary sewer system and the cracks in these holes because of the water seepage from the Mississippi River and climate. So folks saying, you know, get these streets fixed, Mayor. I said, well, y'all talking about climate. Y'all talking about climate. So, but I mean, really, you have to relate it to folks to say that everything around you is climate impact. It's all working together, whether it's the food you eat, whether it's the toilet you flush, whether it's the streets you're driving on to go to work. It's all being impacted by climate impacts that we're seeing every single day. And they're getting worse. They're getting worse.
You have a friend right across the river from you, Mayor Kevin Smith of Helena, West Helena, Arkansas. And
let me say this too. So when we have those 2 high water events, we have a casino. We got 2 in Greenville, and they come over in my casino. And you know, folks get mad when that water is up and it's now up on the levels of structure parking lot where we actually have a shopping park right there at our waterfront. And the park is so full, the pavilion, in 2019, you couldn't see the top of the pavilion. This is 20 feet. So we got sandbags. You can't go on the levee. But when you get up, you can't even see the pavilion. And the casino has to shut down. Things have to shut down. And it messes with your economy. But the folks on the other side of the river in Arkansas, they mad because they can't come over and play the casino, man, do those slots. But, I mean, it's climate impacted. And so it affects daily lives. And so what we have to do is put it down at that small level, but begin to talk about solutions at that bottom-up level that will most definitely get folks to understand how it impacts them every day.
Well, and your colleague right across the river, your friend, Mayor Smith, he had a similar experience very recently. You were talking about high water, but everyone's got low water right now. You only have 7 feet to deal with to move anything in your area, his area too. Farmers came to him, said, Mayor, we have $50 million in product in barges sitting in mud in his port. When's it going to move? And you know what he said to him? He said, I'll tell you what, if we had a wetland around here and we could hold the water and we could let it out slowly, we could be moving stuff and you wouldn't have stuff sitting in the mud. That's right. Yeah. So, and he related that right to climate change and right to a natural solution for a very practical world problem on the ground. You know, I think I want to close a little bit and or get to the closing, but one of the things that I did want to talk about is the work that we're doing with you can lead to other regenerative work across the landscape. For instance, so the projects that we're announcing today alone will reduce nutrient load into the Mississippi River by 7.3 million pounds of annual nutrient flow into the Mississippi. That's another co-benefit that can help us with our soil health issues and help push the regenerative agriculture issue, which is very important to the landscape.
It is extremely important, and when you're talking about things like that, I mean, think everything flows downhill, so anything that's entering there is entering the Mississippi, is entering the ocean. We're dealing with the same thing on the Great Lakes as far as algal blooms on the Great Lakes, and we're working on, you know, again, these wetlands, they can take that nutrient runoff. So we don't just, where are we going to put this wetland? Let's just put it in there. No, again, it's designed specifically for what we're trying to deal with. And of course, habitat, we're always looking at that. But all of these other benefits that we can provide as well. Regenerative ag, of course, is extremely important, and we work with farmers and ranchers up and down the Mississippi River and throughout the United States and North America to what can we do as far as regenerative ag, as far as whether it's farmers or ranchers, and we work with programs with NRCS and USDA and others to help implement some of these projects and programs that are going to benefit, because we're able to have cover crops, we're able to have healthier soils, whether we're talking about in the Great Plains or we're talking about along the Mississippi River. These are all benefits of in these programs and working and talking with people and like what are their goals, and it has to be something that is sustainable for them as well. It has to be have to have benefits for the farmers and ranchers, and so we have a lot of staff at Ducks Unlimited that are working with these farmers and ranchers on these programs, and we have a lot of Ducks Unlimited programs as well to help encourage what they are able to do and what their goals are with regenerative ag and with their successes as well, because it's important that they're successful and we can work together to come up with those solutions.
Colin, I do want to just talk about how the nature-based solutions are complemented by the built infrastructure, and how MRCTI has really helped these cities as well in the terms of equity. And so we want to thank the Biden-Harris administration for the significant investments that they've made in the bipartisan infrastructure law and also the Inflation Reduction Act. And so what you're seeing with Justice 40 initiatives is making sure that those communities that are in most need, who are less equipped to access these large-scale federal vehicles, are now able to access them. And I want to thank MRCTI and the group of experts that you really got around these cities and towns, like you mentioned, Mayor Stang and my other friends upriver who only have 500 folks. some of them don't go to work every single day and they have other jobs. Some of them farmers. And so they need help and access, and I'm putting in an application to get these large scale vehicles to get it down to their people. And so MRCTI created an MRCTI infrastructure facility for large cities and small cities. And we had a number of conversations and a number of organizations helping put these applications together. And so they have proved very fruitful and meaningful. And we're seeing some of these funds come into our city. In Greenville, Mississippi, we've had freight corridor project, we've announced a 142 freight corridor project. We've now announced also a $16 million project for the Economic Development Administration for struggling industries, for flood mitigation and resilience, for port businesses, but also those residential areas right there closest to the levee, where we had several of those sewer failures. And so we are putting that to use, fixing those pipes, fixing those sanitary sewer. We have an EPA partial consent decree that went from 10 to 40 to $110 million. And so these funds are really helping us leverage state funds, sewer revolving funds, but also helping us access the resources that we need to do to impact lives and improve the quality and quantity of life of folks. Safe, clean drinking water, making sure our ports are more resilient, making sure that we're doing things ecologically and economically safe is all part of this relationship we have with American OEN and also MRCTI. And it's making a difference, I can say, wholeheartedly in Greenville, Mississippi, and in talking to my friends up and down the river, is making a difference to all of us. So thank you so much, Colin.
You're welcome. Now we're an extension of you, Mayor, and think we can close on that point, and I'll open it up to any questions anybody may have just for the last couple of minutes. But how are you paying for all this? I mean, how are we paying for all this infrastructure? Where's the money coming from? And I will say we have some very diverse funding streams. Ducks Unlimited has been doing this for quite a while. You guys have quite diverse funding channels to make these projects go. We are pursuing funds out of the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the IRA to help with this work. But philanthropy is playing a role, and philanthropy actually got us this far. So I do want to acknowledge the Walton Family Foundation. Walton Family Foundation we're a grantee of theirs, MRCTI is, and they work with Ducks Unlimited as well. They have been helping us with this work and made it possible for us to get it off the ground. And going forward, we're going to have to take advantage of the IRA and the Jobs Act. But also, I think, there's a role here for global capital. And CDP's partnership has really lit us up to, global capital will want to get in on this, because 350,000 tons of carbon sequestration, that's a lot of bankable carbon. And it's reliable municipal projects. It's reducing hazards, reducing risks. So that's something we're definitely going to be exploring and moving forward on. And I do want to mention, climate performance is a disruptor. Climate projects are disruptive projects. And nothing said that more than when we were working with you to get the states on board with these projects. And because they're disaster resilience projects, DU and MRCTI found themselves not just going to the Departments of Environmental Quality, the Departments of Natural Resources with states, which is where you guys normally were used to dealing. We were going to Departments of Public Safety, State Departments of Homeland Security, State Departments of Emergency Management, that had not thought of it this way at all. They had not thought of conservation work as a disaster mitigation platform. I don't know if you wanted to say anything about that real quick, Karen, but those were interesting conversations. These states wanted to get there.
Yep. And
there were a number of bureaucratic hurdles. And I remember talking to the Secretary of Public Safety, or Secretary of Homeland Security, back of a letter lack of a better term, for Iowa. And he was beside himself. He said, Colin, I want to do this project. I love this project. This is exactly what we're looking for. My own budget rules forbid me from doing this project right now. But I tell you what, I am going to change these rules. We're going to work with the governor to make sure that we change this rule so we can work with you and get this project moving.
Yeah, I mean, and that's just one example. Especially when you're working with the states, and they're wanting to do these projects for multiple reasons. They like the co-benefits, all the benefits of the work, but a lot of these funds might come in, but they don't have the financial, the way their budget structure is. It's really difficult for them to take in these funds to then work with the partners to get the money spent on the ground. And so they're having to come up with ways to work around these different hurdles like you were talking about. It's just some of the red tape that we run into. And I know we're going to come into a lot more of those, but the good news is that we have so many people that are supportive of these projects, and again, it's something the states want to do, so we just have to figure out ways. We can't, I think you said it, Mayor, we're not going to do it alone, all right? It's not one state, not one city, not one country, not one continent. So we're all going to have to work together to find out the ways to work through these systems. But it is something different than we're running up against, but we are used to working with these partners, and we do have some great ones out there to work with. So,
and we can say nationally, the President Biden said it yesterday, America is all in. And so that framework can change when the top is saying we're in with climate performance, we're in with climate mitigation, we're in with climate adaptation, we're in to make sure we make cities more resilient. And so it was great what he said yesterday. It is great when this organization was founded and how it began to get folks around the country, around the world to do what we need to do. But it's really wonderful and great to hear it from a national leader like President Biden and say we're all in and we're doing these things because we know they're important.
And on that unified note, I will end our conversation there and open it up to any questions from the audience if there are any. I guess there are. Okay, there are some good questions. Great.
Hey, my question is, what is the time frame for this project? How many years is it going to take, or months? Probably not months.
Great question.
That's a great question. Karen, I'll let you fill in the details. We're as the mayor mentioned, some of these projects are already underway. Some of them are well on their way. But we're looking at a horizon of 2030, near-term projects of 160,000 tons of carbon, 66,000 acres, and then closer to 2030, hopefully doubling that carbon sequestration amount. But so 2030 is what we're aiming for. But Karen, I'll let you put a finer point on that because it does depend on a lot of things. But
I was going to say that answer depends. So yes, 2030 is the goal, and again, I think you mentioned it earlier as far as trying to reduce that for the 100-year flood, right? So we're trying to get that 8-hour flood event down to where it's not going to be a disaster. Which, by the way, I don't know if we mentioned it, but like 34 natural disasters in the last 10 years in those 10 states alone along the Mississippi River is the declaration. So we're trying to change that. But, sorry, I had to throw that in there, make sure that the importance of these projects. But a project from the time that we design one or start, we say this is what we want to do, and we start with the design and everything. And by the time we get the permits, because the permits we have to get are just like if you were going to remove a wetland, we have to get permits to put in wetlands as well. It can take multiple years. And so even when we've identified funding and we know what we're going to do, it can take several years to get one project through. So 2030, I think, is, we expect to be well underway in the next, 7 years, and very close, and hopefully hitting a lot of those goals. But a lot of that does depend on some of those things that we were talking about as far as making some changes to rules and regulations and statutes and legislation to allow us to get these projects on the ground. It's important. We can't say, hey, here's the money, but oh wait, we're going to keep putting barrier and barrier and barrier in front of you. So we have to work together to get those out of the way, and that'll speed it up a lot.
What we did get passed was the Resilience Revolving Loan Fund of $500 million, $100 million for the next 5 years in the bipartisan infrastructure law signed by the president on built infrastructure, because cities and towns just can't keep waiting. And so this is going to allow not only in floods, but droughts, forest fires in California. And these group of mayors and MRCTI actually writing this piece of legislation, and it passed the Senate unanimous consent, is a piece of legislation we want to tap in with the built infrastructure. The nature-based solutions is only just the icing on the cake. And so, you got developers, when we talk about ecological and economic development projects, the banking industry and the insurance industry is telling us, we'll support this riverfront convention center, if we know you're doing resilient work, but we will give you lower rates if we know you got a wetland that's going to kind of prevent that water from coming over it and causing us to do insurance. So it's working in tandem with economic development projects, but it's working in tandem with making sure we're being more resilient with the built infrastructure that we have as well.
Other questions? Yeah, Rodon?
Yeah, thank you. My question is pertaining to land ownership, relations with the states, with the federal government. To build a wetland, you need land, and oftentimes that's owned by private folks. And it makes me think in the 1950s, the Netherlands had a horrific flood. Many people died, and they instituted a new program that they did for the last many decades called Room for the River. I don't know what the word is in Dutch. And partially through eminent domain, and oftentimes through just voluntary kind of managed retreat, they've made room for the river, and this has guided Dutch policy forever. Now the Dutch export it all over the world. So I'm just curious, along the basin and the work that you're doing, 5 different territories here, you're likely going to want to expand. How do you deal with the issue of land, private land ownership? I'm sure that's
Sure, absolutely, and everything, of course, are voluntary projects. Luckily, along the river, we have a lot of state and federal land. So, wildlife management areas, recreation areas, refuges, fish and wildlife refuges. So, a lot of the work that we do is on public land, and so that does help as far as that. But I had mentioned one project where we're talking to landowners that have land that's in flood-prone agriculture, and it doesn't do very well, and they're willing sellers. They want to sell, and what we'll do is, again, we'll restore that floodplain, and then we'll make that part of a recreation area. It's not our intention. We don't hold land, Ducks Unlimited. That's what we do is we restore it, and then we will find a takeout partner, a state or a federal partner, to take that land and put it into public recreation. And then they also, of course, help manage that property and that project long term, because Colin mentioned that they do take restoration and keeping up with, just like any kind of infrastructure. You can't just leave it alone. You have to keep things working on it. And so those state and federal agencies can also serve as that partner too. So it's a great relationship.
And we, in and around our cities, we have actually, on the Mississippi River, we have a lot of what we call scrub land. This is land that's no longer in production, and it's not being developed, but it's cut off from the river, either because it was in production at one time, and it has a giant levee in front of it, or a road crossing it, and that has cut the river off from it. And we can basically hand it over to DU, and they can reconnect it to the river. They can allow, that's a lot of the Two Rivers project, actually.
A ton of it, yeah. That's exactly what that project is. And so reconnecting that, so when there is a heavy flood event, you can actually open up, pull all that water, into this wetland, and then slowly release it back into the river whenever the water levels go down. So, yep, that's a perfect example.
That's at the confluence of the Illinois, the Mississippi, and the Missouri rivers, right? Yeah, it's a big confluence area. Kate.
This is on. Yes, it is. Hey, thank you. This is so inspiring. And for a British person to hear such amazing accents, I must say it's been a lovely hour. Not to mention, of course, the amazing stories that you've been able to tell. So I've got two questions. The first is in terms of that long-term intervention. How do you guarantee that this land will remain in the state that we want it to remain as a wetland and not be developed in any other ways? What type of covenants might you explore? And is that an option? And then the second question is around amazing work so far. Is it enough? Do you need more? Is there a potential for more of this work? And how do we crowd in, or would you welcome crowding in of private finance into these interventions?
And so the first part, again, with if it's land that's with our state and federal partners, we know that they'll continue to manage it. And then we also work a lot with easements too. If it's not land it's going to go with public land and it stays with private land ownership, we'll have easements to keep that. We put easements on the property. Again, these are all voluntary easements, but then that would keep that from development in the future.
And I can talk a little bit about is it enough and what are we aiming for here. So 2 Degrees Adapt was able to answer the question of, okay, here are the most vulnerable areas. This is what you can do in the near term, and they really able to hit that 8-hour peak mark. We were able to determine from public data, okay, when did the most damage occur? And where was this damage? Using 2019 as a baseline. To use any other smaller flood didn't make any sense. And 8 hours of peak flood was something that they could directly relate to DU's short-term capacity, project capacity. Okay, great. What about areas that are not very vulnerable? What about these other areas that they're going to get hit too? They're just not quite as vulnerable as the 5 areas that have been teased out, right? All told, and this is this is an estimate using Corps of Engineer data and NOAA data and FEMA $1 billion disaster data as a historical moniker. We would need to activate about 20% of the land around the Mississippi River as disaster mitigation storage to free up the entire corridor and multiple counties out away from the river's edge from disaster impacts multiples of 10 percentage points down from where they are now. I was surprised. That seemed like a low number to me because we lost 80% of our wetlands. How can you say we would only need to reactivate 20% of the land? And that came into, well, it's not just wetlands. It's what you're doing with this land. It's reconnecting it to backwater, giant areas of floodplain, levee setbacks. Some of these levee setbacks today are 2 miles long, 4 kilometers in size. We would need more of that or get rid of them altogether. And forests. So it's a combination of assets. And like Karen said, you don't just throw an asset here and throw an asset there and hope for the best. It's very close metric analysis on this is the performance we want out of this asset. This is what we want to do for this region. And this is the type of asset that would get us the furthest in the shortest amount of time. Maybe the answer isn't a wetland. Marshes and wetlands work differently. They function differently. They behave differently. Forest as well. And backwater and floodplain. All of these things act differently and interact differently. So thank God we have a turnkey delivery partner where we don't have to shepherd this out constantly. It can all be in-house expertise to determine these very real, on-the-ground questions. We also have a new level of scientific data available to us that didn't exist 5 years ago. In 2017, we didn't have the amount of federal data that's available today. We didn't have the early warning systems. We didn't have the constant monitoring. And to tell you the truth, this sounds weird, but what we learn from an unprecedented event is a lot. I mean, what we've learned from going through the 2019 flood, the 2012 drought, and now the 30-year drought, what we learn from these events is basically how far nature can take us in terms of pushing us and pushing our own systems that have never been pushed this far before. So without these disasters and without the current technology and the data and with all of the expertise, we wouldn't be able to make this, we wouldn't be able to even start.
Colin, if you can close by the finance piece and how we welcome finance in helping with these projects.
Yeah. So we've talked with CDP and other partners. This was the last part of your question. What is the role for global capital to be involved in this? And there's an obvious payoff from the carbon sequestration, right? But there's an additional parametric payoff for the global commodity supply chain actors, right? Pepsi, Coke, Anheuser-Busch, General Mills, Cargill, all the commodity producers, movers, and manufacturers whose bottom line depends on the environmental systems of the Mississippi River. There is a role for them to play here. What that role looks like and how does one pay but not the other? Why would I care if I don't have to pay if someone else is already paying? What do they get immediately in return? What do they get long term? That all has to be worked out, but there is definitely a role here for global companies.
Yesterday we had a meeting with members of Congress and several CEOs of these companies that he named, and they're very excited about the nature-based solutions and other things we're doing. Once we leave COP on the 15th, we're going over to Amsterdam to meet with the Dutch Bank before we get back to the States to talk about global investment in these projects as well. So thank you so much for your question. Thank y'all for your time.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And thank you for your partnership and your support of everything that our mayors are doing for our wonderful river basin. Thank you to Ducks Unlimited. And thank you, Mayor. And I want to definitely thank our host, World Wildlife Fund, and America's All In. MRCTI is proud to be one of the founding members of, we are still in is how it started, and now we're all in completely. But it's an amazing, that effort is really amazing because that effort brings us to the COP. And it creates a world stage for communities, 30,000 people to Mayor Stang of 180 people, our smallest city, to our largest city of Memphis, 650,000. So thank you, everyone, and good night from COP27 in Egypt. Thank you.